As the sun sets on the annals of history, it casts a long dark shadow over some of its most harrowing chapters. Among these are the grotesque human experiments conducted under the guise of scientific progress and warfare. These abominations of human curiosity and cruelty span continents and eras, leaving behind a legacy of pain and horror. Imagine, if you dare, the year 1941 in the depths of Auschwitz, where Dr. Josef Mengele, known infamously as the Angel of Death, orchestrated a series of cruel experiments on prisoners. His twisted fascination with twins led him to subject these siblings to inhumane procedures, seeking to unravel the mysteries of genetics with a scalpel drenched in cruelty. Across the ocean, in the land of the rising sun, during World War II, Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army, carried out brutal experiments on thousands of Chinese and Russian prisoners, led by General Shiro Ishii from 1937 to 1945. These acts involved vivisections, weapon testing, and exposure to lethal pathogens. The screams echoing from the Pingfang district, where the unit was based, still haunt the pages of history. Further south, in South Africa, during the late 20th century, the aversion project under the apartheid regime subjected homosexual individuals to forced conversion. Therapies, including chemical castration and electric shock therapy, led by Dr. Aubrey Leff. This dark chapter, from the 1970s to the 1980s, sought to correct homosexuality, inflicting deep psychological and physical scars on its victims. In our journey through these grim historical episodes, we face the appalling nature of these experiments and a shocking indifference to the suffering inflicted. Author and activist Helen Keller once said, "Science may have found a cure for most evils, but it has found no remedy for the worst of them all, the apathy of human beings." What led these individuals to perpetrate such dreadful and reprehensible acts? Join us as we explore the sinister world of human experimentation, piecing together the fragmented stories of the victims and confronting the disturbing truth that sometimes the most horrifying masks of healers. Welcome to the echoes of darkness, the haunting legacy of Nazi medical atrocities in the grim epic of World War II. An unspeakable narrative unfolded under the Nazi regime, marking a dark chapter in human history. This was a period when medical ethics were obliterated, and human lives were reduced to mere variables in a cruel equation of experimentation. The concentration camps, infamous for their brutality, became the settings for these sinister trials. Auschwitz, under Dr. Josef Mengele's reign of terror from 1943 onwards, witnessed some of the most barbaric experiments. Mengele, an ardent advocate of Nazi racial ideology, conducted experiments on twins with a cold scientific curiosity that belied a complete absence of empathy. His fascination extended to those with heterochromatic eyes, attempting to artificially replicate this condition through painful injections directly into the eyes of his victims. His aim, ostensibly, was to unravel the secrets of multiple births to boost the Aryan birth rate. Yet his methods were devoid of any shred of morality. Mengele subjected twins to unimaginable tortures, transfusions of blood from one twin to another, and barbaric surgeries without anesthesia. The majority of these twins, primarily children, perished in agony. Their bodies were then dissected for further study. This Angel of Death, as he came to be known, often remarked casually on his research, once stating, "The more we do to you, the less you seem to believe we are doing it." Mengele's obsession wasn't confined to twins. He conducted experiments on dwarfs and people with physical abnormalities, driven by a twisted desire to understand and manipulate human genetics. His name became synonymous with terror among the camp prisoners, a specter of death lurking in white medical attire. In Dachau, The infamous Dr. Sigmund Rascher conducted equally horrific experiments under the pretext of military research between 1942 and 1943. He led a series of hypothermia studies where prisoners were submerged in icy water or left naked in the freezing cold to determine how long German pilots might survive in similar conditions. His notes, chilling in their clinical detachment, detail the body's gradual shutdown in excruciating detail. Rascher's correspondence with Heinrich Himmler, in which he described his freezing experiments, reflects a disturbing disregard for human life. One prisoner, forced into a tank of ice water, is reported to have calmly smoked a cigarette as he slowly froze, a testament to the extraordinary resilience and defiance of the human spirit. Rascher also experimented with coagulants, attempting to devise a quick treatment for gunshot wounds. Prisoners were deliberately wounded and untested drugs were administered, often leading to severe complications or death. In Buchenwald, the name Dr. Irvin Ding Schuler stands synonymous with medical terror. From 1941 to 1945, he spearheaded experiments where prisoners were deliberately infected with typhus to test the efficacy of various vaccines. The morbidity and mortality rates were astronomical, yet Ding Schuler noted these outcomes with bureaucratic indifference. One survivor, recalling the horror, described how the screams of the victims could be heard throughout the camp. These experiments were not the pursuit of science. They were acts of barbarism veiled in the language of research. Each of the victims, often Jews, Roma, or political prisoners, were dehumanized and necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the Aryan race. As one survivor recounted, they didn't see us as humans, we were just objects to them. These words echo the Nuremberg trials, which brought some of these war criminals to justice, also highlighted the profound ethical breaches in these experiments. The trials led to the formulation of the Nuremberg Code, a set of research ethics principles for human experimentation. One of the judges at the trials, Charles Beals, remarked, "The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts." Shadows of Harbin, the grim saga of Unit 731. In the annals of wartime atrocities, few chapters are as chilling as the story of Unit 731. This covert chapter, written in the shadows of the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II, became the epicenter of some of the most inhumane experiments ever conducted under the guise of scientific research. Unit 731, led by Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a microbiologist and military officer, embarked on a ghastly journey into human experimentation that blurred the lines between science and sadism. Established in 1936, the unit operated under the innocuous name of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Yet behind this veneer of public health, a sinister plot unfolded, one that disregarded all notions of morality and ethics. The facility, sprawling over 6 square kilometers, was a state-of-the-art complex comprising various laboratories, prisons, and testing areas. Within these walls, prisoners of war and civilians, primarily Chinese and Russian, were subjected to experiments that haunt the conscience of humanity. One of the most gruesome experiments involved vivisection without anesthesia. Prisoners, referred to not by name but by the dehumanizing term maruta or logs, were infected with diseases such as plague, cholera, and typhus. Doctors then dissected these live victims to study the effects of these diseases on the human body. The chilling detachment of the personnel involved was epitomized in the words of a unit member who once coldly remarked, "Cutting open a screaming maruta was no different from slicing into a loaf of bread." The frostbite experiments conducted by the unit were equally harrowing. Victims were subjected to the harsh winters outside Harbin, their limbs left to freeze. Subsequently, these frostbitten extremities were studied, often involving amputation without anesthesia. The inhumanity of these experiments was not lost on the perpetrators. Iki himself once remarked, "For the sake of Japan's victory, I wouldn't hesitate to do anything." Perhaps one of the most horrifying aspects of Unit 731's activities was the development of biological weapons. Prisoners were used as living test subjects for pathogens. One of the most notorious incidents involved the dropping of ceramic bombs filled with plague-infested fleas over Chinese cities such as Ningbo and Shanghai in 1940 and 1941, leading to epidemic outbreaks. These experiments were not merely scientific pursuits. They were tests of terror aimed at gauging the effectiveness of biological agents as weapons of war. Unit 731 personnel carried out their grim work with chilling efficiency and detachment. Shiro Ishii, the architect of this nightmare, once stated, "A doctor's God-given mission is to block and treat disease, but the work I'm doing now is exactly the opposite." His acknowledgement of the malevolent nature of his work underlines the moral abyss into which these scientists had plunged. The ethical vacuum within which Unit 731 operated is further exemplified by their testing of various chemical weapons on prisoners. Phosgene and cyanide, among other deadly gases, were tested for their lethality in different conditions. The indifference towards human life was starkly evident in the words of a Unit 731 surgeon who once stated, "The logs scream when you cut them. I stopped caring." The sheer scale and brutality of the experiments conducted by Unit 731 remain unparalleled. The estimated number of victims ranges from 3,000 to 12,000. Although the exact number may never be known, the victims were not just subjects of experimentation. They were dehumanized in the most extreme ways imaginable, reduced to mere tools in the pursuit of a twisted vision of scientific progress. As the war concluded, the imminent threat of exposure led to the systematic destruction of the Pingfang facility. In their final act of cruelty, the remaining prisoners were executed and documents were burned. The Japanese forces left behind a legacy of death and a profound moral abyss. Shiro Ishii's surrender in 1945 did not immediately bring justice. In a controversial decision, many researchers from Unit 731 were granted immunity by the United States in exchange for their data on biological warfare. The stories of the victims, silenced and buried for decades, only began to surface in the late 20th century, revealing the extent of the atrocities committed. As the dust of war settled, the horrors of Unit 731 remained buried in silence for decades. The victims of these atrocities had no voice for many years. Their suffering was dismissed, and their memories erased under the guise of secrecy and national interest. Even after the war ended, justice was not swift for those who had suffered the darkest of fates. Many of the perpetrators walked free, shielded by political deals and the cold calculus of post-war geopolitics. Shiro Eki and his colleagues escaped punishment in exchange for their research data, which the United States deemed valuable for advancing its own biological weapons programs. The survivors of Unit 731 were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, haunted by the memories of unspeakable tortures and experiments. Their voices were muffled for years, the public unaware of the extent of their suffering. It was not until decades later that the truth began to emerge. In the late 20th century, the survivors finally found their voices, and the stories of their torment began to surface through the persistence of activists, journalists, and a few brave individuals who dared to uncover the darkness hidden within the shadows of history. The world was forced to reckon with the unspeakable truth, though the exposure of Unit 731's atrocities came too late to bring justice to its victims. The survivors now continue to speak out. demanding recognition for the suffering they endured. Their efforts serve as a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink in the name of progress and power. The survivors and their families now work to ensure that future generations are never again subjected to such barbaric experimentation. The haunting legacy of Unit 731 serves as a grim warning that the pursuit of knowledge and power must always be tempered with humanity and ethical responsibility. For, in the absence of those values, history's darkest chapters may repeat themselves.